We all know one of the most tragic images in history, a Roman governor standing on a terrace in Jerusalem, washing his hands while an enraged crowd cries out for the crucifixion of an innocent man. We all know that on that Good Friday, Pontius Pilate signed the death sentence of Jesus of Nazareth. But have you ever wondered what happened afterward? What did that man do that very night, after the crowd had already dispersed, when the sky above Golgotha turned black as night in the middle of the day, and when the earth shook so violently that the rocks split apart? Today, I want to reveal a detail that history books often leave out. Pontius Pilate could not simply go home and sleep. As prefect of the Roman Empire, he had a formal, unavoidable, and absolute duty. He had to take a scroll, dip his pen in ink, and write an official report, a detailed account to be sent directly to Rome, into the hands of Emperor Tiberius, explaining those cosmic events and the later, inexplicable disappearance of the condemned man's body. That document existed, and its contents were so shocking, so undeniable that the early church fathers openly challenged the Emperor of Rome to go into his secret archives and read it for himself. In this video, we are going to break the seals of history. We will uncover what Pontius Pilate wrote to Rome the day after the death of Jesus, and the irrefutable historical evidence that shook the greatest empire in the world. To understand the full magnitude of this mystery, we first need to step into the mindset of ancient Rome. The Roman Empire did not rule the world by swords and legions alone, but also through bureaucracy. Rome was a perfectly engineered administrative machine. Every unusual atmospheric event, every rebellion, every execution of an important political prisoner had to be recorded in what were known as the Acta Diurna and the Acta Senatus, the official records of the state. No governor in any province could leave out crucial information without risking his own life under a charge of high treason. Now imagine Pontius Pilate's situation during that Passover weekend in the year 33, or 38, according to some calculations. Pilate was no fool. He was a cold, calculating military man. He knew perfectly well that the execution of a carpenter from Galilee by itself would not have interested Emperor Tiberius. But everything surrounding that death could not be hidden. His wife, Claudia Procula, whom tradition even honors as a saint in some Eastern churches, had begged him, terrified by a prophetic dream, not to condemn that righteous man. And Pilate had seen with his own eyes the veil of the temple in Jerusalem tear from top to bottom. He had heard the report of the Roman centurion, one of his own men, a soldier hardened by 1,000 battles, returning from the foot of the cross, beating his chest and declaring, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." And even more serious for the security of the empire, on Sunday morning, Pilate received the news that the tomb, sealed with the imperial seal of Rome and guarded by heavily armed soldiers, had been found empty. The Roman guards, men trained to die before failing a mission, had fled in terror, speaking of beings of light in an earthquake. Pilate had to write to Tiberius, and he did. That report, known in antiquity as the Acts of Pilate, not to be confused with the later forged versions, traveled by sea from Judea to the heart of Rome, where it was stored in the imperial archives. But how do we know this document really existed? Was it just a Christian legend? Not at all. And here we come to one of the most electrifying and courageous moments in the entire history of the church. It was around the year 150 AD. Christians were being persecuted, thrown to the lions, used as human torches. In that atmosphere of absolute terror, one towering figure rose up. Saint Justin Martyr, one of the greatest philosophers and apologists of the early church. Justin decided to write an apology, an official letter of defense, addressed to none other than the reigning emperor, Antoninus Pius, and to the Roman Senate. And in order to prove that Jesus had performed extraordinary miracles, had healed the sick, and had been crucified, Justin did not quote the Gospels. He knew the emperor had no interest whatsoever in Christian texts. Listen carefully to the exact words Saint Justin wrote to the most powerful man in the world. And that he did these things, you can verify from the acts drawn up under Pontius Pilate. And shortly afterward, speaking of the crucifixion, he repeats the claim. These things did happen, and you can learn of them from the acts drawn up under Pontius Pilate. Stop for a moment and think about the weight of that statement. No man in his right mind would dare tell a Roman emperor Go check your own secret archives, unless he were absolutely certain that the document was there. It would have been political and intellectual suicide. If Pilate's report had not existed, the emperor would have needed only 3 minutes to expose Justin and discredit Christianity forever. But no one disproved Justin because those records were there, and he was not the only one. About 50 years later, another giant of the church, Tertullian, a brilliant Roman lawyer who converted to Christianity, issued the same challenge again. Addressing Roman magistrates, he wrote with astonishing confidence, "All these things concerning Christ, Pilate himself, who in his own conscience was already a Christian, reported to Tiberius, the Caesar of that time." But what exactly did that secret dispatch contain? Although the original document was lost, or, as many believe, deliberately destroyed during Diocletian's great persecutions in order to erase the evidence, its contents leaked through history. One of the central points in Pilate's report concerned the darkness that covered the land. And here the story becomes even more remarkable because Christianity finds an unexpected ally: pagan historians and astronomers. The Romans were obsessed with the stars, and two historians of antiquity, men who had no interest in helping Christians, recorded the impossible. The first was Thales, a historian who wrote around the year 52 AD. After the death of Christ, he desperately tried to explain the darknesses as nothing more than a normal solar eclipse. But another intellectual, Julius Africanus, firmly refuted that claim, reminding everyone of one basic scientific fact: Christ was crucified during the Jewish Passover, which always falls during a full moon, and it is scientifically and astronomically impossible for a solar eclipse to occur during a full moon. In addition, another pagan Greek historian, Phlegon of Tralles, wrote these precise words in his chronicles, preserved in the Roman records. In the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad, which corresponds exactly to the year 33 AD, there was an eclipse of the sun, the greatest ever known up to that time. At the 6th hour of the day, darkness fell so completely that the stars appeared in the sky, and a great earthquake in Bithynia destroyed most of the city of Nicaea. The Romans knew it. The universe itself had recorded the death of its creator, and Pilate had to confirm these supernatural disasters in his letter. As the centuries passed, copies of texts known as the Acts of Pilate began to circulate. These were later combined into what we now know as the Apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus. Although the Church did not include this text in the official Bible, because it contains later literary embellishments, scholars agree that it preserves a core of remarkable historical truths drawn precisely from the testimony of the Romans who were present that day. According to these texts, Pilate harshly interrogated the centurions who had guarded the tomb. Do you remember what the canonical Gospels say? Matthew tells us that the Jewish priests paid the Roman guards to say that the disciples had stolen the body while they were asleep. But do you really believe that a ruthless Roman governor like Pilate would have accepted the excuse, "We were asleep"? For a Roman soldier, falling asleep while on guard duty meant immediate death. Ancient traditions tell us that when they stood before Pilate, the soldiers broke down. They told the truth. They confessed that they had seen an angel descend from heaven, whose appearance was like lightning. They admitted that they had become like dead men from terror, and that they had witnessed the resurrection. Pilate, a pagan man full of superstition, was overcome with fear. He had killed a god. And what happened when Pilate's report finally arrived in Rome and reached Emperor Tiberius? Here again, we rely on the writings of Tertullian, and we come face to face with one of the greatest what-ifs in human history. Tertullian says that Tiberius, after reading the detailed report about the miracles of Jesus, his unjust condemnation, the darkening of the sun, and the resurrection confirmed by his own soldiers, was deeply shaken. He did not think for a moment that it was some Jewish fable. On the contrary, Tiberius took Pilate's report and brought it before the Roman Senate. His proposal was astonishing. He officially asked the Senate to consecrate Christ, that is, to add Jesus of Nazareth to the pantheon of Rome's official gods, thereby allowing Christians to worship freely. The emperor of the world wanted to legalize Christianity just months after the death of Jesus, based solely on the evidence sent by Pilate. But the Roman Senate refused. Why did he bring? Because of pure political pride. According to ancient Roman law, a new divinity could not be approved by the emperor alone, if it had not first been examined and approved by the Senate. The senators felt bypassed by Tiberius's enthusiasm, and they rejected the proposal, declaring Christianity an unlawful superstition, a religion not officially recognized. Tiberius, outraged, still held to his personal conviction, and according to Tertullian, he threatened death to anyone who falsely accused Christians during his reign. But the Senate's refusal became the seal of a tragedy. From that single negative vote came 300 years of brutal persecution, 300 years in which millions of martyrs gave their lives in arenas and catacombs to defend the truth of that empty tomb, a truth that Rome's secret records had known from the very beginning. And Pontius Pilate, what became of the man who held in his hands the life of the Son of God, who recognized his innocence, who certified the miracles, and yet, out of human cowardice, handed him over to die? History was not merciful to him. A few years after the crucifixion, he fell from power. He was removed from his post in Judea because of his extreme cruelty toward the Samaritans and was summoned back to Rome. With no more power and no more glory, tradition passes down the story of a man tormented by remorse. Eusebius of Caesarea, the historian of the early church, records that Pilate ended his days in exile, perhaps in Gaul, in what is now France, where, overwhelmed by despair and haunted by the ghosts of that Good Friday, he took his own life. The man who tried to wash his hands of the truth ended up drowning in his own failure. It is a tragic spiritual lesson for all of us. No one can remain neutral before Jesus Christ. Either you accept him as Lord or you condemn yourself. Dear friends, we have traveled through the centuries and into the secret archives of the most powerful empire of the ancient world. The ancient Romans tried to suppress the truth. The original documents may have been burned or hidden away in some inaccessible underground chamber during the persecutions. But the power of truth cannot be archived. We do not need a piece of parchment to believe in the resurrection. We have evidence in Phlegon, in Thallus, in the writings of Saint Justin. But above all, we have the living proof in the blood of the martyrs and in the sacraments of our church, which has stood firm for 2,000 years against the storms of history. Jesus Christ is historically real. His passion is historically attested, and his forgiveness is available today, at this very moment, to anyone who comes to him.